The first thing they noticed were the boots. Thick, dull grey, reinforced at the ankle. Their soles left heavy prints across the sterile black floors of the Pertan Institute's arrival hall. 12 of them, stepping in formation, flanked by a taller figure who walked with a deliberate limp, Captain Joran Vale. No salute was given, no words offered. Each human wore a grey visitor band tight around the wrist. No colour, no insignia, just a barcode and an origin tag. Earthcom Acadia. Administrator Irvek Till watched from the upper balcony, his eyes narrowing. He leaned slightly into the rail, filtering data from the delegation dossier hovering in his neural display. No military accolades, no combat honours, no formal lineage traced through Accord nobility. The Commonwealth Academy claimed academic distinction, but not through scores or tactical simulations. Instead, Irvik found notes on behavioral anomalies, neural elasticity indexes, something called parallel improvisation scores. None of it made sense to him. The youngest cadet was barely 14. The oldest, maybe 17 by Earth measure. All male, all quiet, no fear, no reverence. The Pertan Institute of Strategic Conflict had trained 10,000 war commanders across 6 empires. Lokar 9 was sacred ground, where simulations carved doctrine into bone. Irvek had watched countless exchange delegations from aligned species walk through these halls. Most arrived stiff with awe, eager to demonstrate posture and precision. This Earth group. They moved like a mechanic crew, inspecting the floor tiles. One boy bent at the knee, tapped the corner seam with his knuckle, nodded once, and kept walking. Another glanced at the hollow panels on the wall, not reading the text, but watching the data latency between command input and refresh cycle. "This is the delegation," scoffed instructor Kevin Thor, standing behind Irvek. "Where's the muscle? I expected exo-trained infantry, not gangly adolescents and a limping guardian." "Not muscle," Irvek muttered, scanning the profile on Captain Vale. They sent a relic. Vale's record was sparse. Multiple campaigns, discharge under Earth's Post-Conflict Demobilization Act. One commendation line stuck out. Non-iterative tactics under cognitive load, acceptable. Irvek didn't know what that meant. He didn't like not knowing. The welcome hall lighting dimmed, signaling formal introduction phase. Irvek descended the side stairs as the humans approached the central podium. The cadets lined up loosely, too loose. Not one of them looked to Vale for cue. They simply halted, at near equal distance apart, their spacing imperfect but consistent. Irvek began his speech. "On behalf of the Accord and the Pertan Institute, we welcome you as observers to this seat of historical excellence. The Accord recognizes Earth's recent acceptance as a probationary culture in the tiered civil structure. While your contributions to peace remain minimal, your species has, nonetheless, drawn curiosity. We hope this exchange will provide perspective and perhaps temperance." One of the cadets, broad-shouldered with a sharp jaw and short buzzed hair, nudged the boy beside him and whispered something. Irvek's translator implant caught only the last fragment. "Temperance, huh? Sounds like a toothpaste brand." They laughed, quietly. Irvek's jaw tensed. "As per Article 19, subsection D," he continued, "your access will be limited to observational modules, no combat simulations, no systems interfacing. All neural feeds will remain locked to passive telemetry. These are not negotiable. You will observe, reflect, and learn. That is all." Vale didn't nod. He didn't move. But Irvek felt the man's eyes, like stone behind glass. Cold, unreadable. The cadets were assigned quarters in Wing C, separate from other interspecies groups. Not isolation exactly, but controlled distance. Each dorm was installed with one local AI monitor, voice limited to Earth Standard 2.3 dialect. It was, Irvek believed, a generous compromise. Let them feel safe, heard, humoured. What followed should have been an uneventful week of diplomatic optics, observation windows, guest lectures, debriefing exercises. Irvek ensured their itinerary was packed with ceremonial briefings and non-interactive displays. drone war replays, doctrine history lectures, ethical conflict scenarios. He left no room for boredom, yet the humans didn't respond as expected. They didn't ask about troop formations or historic victories. They asked about signal bounce time in feedback arrays. One cadet, a wiry boy with near-white hair, spent 2 hours watching an idle Simdex boot cycle. Another drew symbol diagrams of AI avatar transitions and asked how error loops were resolved during multi-threaded engagements. Irvek flagged their behavior as passive-aggressive. Curious, yes, but disruptive in their indifference. On day 1, they sat through a victory through protocol lecture without a single note. The instructor, offended, asked if the material was too advanced. A boy with a lean face and permanent smirk replied, "No, we're just waiting to see where it breaks." Irvek received that report with clenched fists. By evening, Irvek began reviewing the sim rotation schedules, cross-checking that no real-time scenarios intersected with Earth's access zones. He didn't trust them. There was something in their eyes, flat, watchful, not eager, but not asleep either. They weren't overwhelmed. They were calculating. Irvek filed a note to his adjutant. Recommend recalibration of schedule to reduce proximity to live sim cadets. Potential for cross-pollination undesirable, but low. Car-9 systems were built on legacy scripts, rotational layers woven through 5 generations of code, and in a system as old and vast as this, one error, one tag left unchecked, could mean a breach. It came at 0317, standard cycle. The roster for the morning war sim updated. Segment G57. Hostiles, Zarnian upperclassmen, neural grade synchronized. Opponents, Earth delegation. Tag, rotational active participation, unverified. No override request was registered, no emergency halt initiated. Irvek's comm pinged once, then twice, then silence. 12 Earth cadets, visitor bands still grey, entered the simulation bay. Captain Vale stood at the entry threshold, arms behind his back, watching them go. He did not stop them. He did not request removal. He merely turned his head once toward the observation deck's black glass and spoke 4 words. Trust in observer agency. Irvek, watching from behind that same glass, felt something shift. Not fear. Not yet. Something worse. Miscalculation. They weren't supposed to be there. The G57 simulation bay lit with standby pulses as the cadets filed in, 12 Earth boys with visitor bands still dull grey, each taking a knee or checking their suits without a word. The arena itself was a multi-tiered engagement zone, vertical maze structures on one side, open trench mock-ups on the other, designed for squad-based coordinated assault. The room usually thrummed with anticipation. Today, it buzzed with confusion. On the opposite end, 6 Zarnian upperclassmen activated their neural sync helmets. Their squad leader, Instruct Cadet Therax, tilted his head when he saw the loading profile. He expected trainee drones. Instead, he found unregistered avatars, raw tags without institutional rank, no signal trees, no combat lineage, just 12 blank fields marked Earth Commonwealth Delegation, Provisional Access. His second-in-command hissed. That has to be a joke. Therax didn't reply. He was already recalibrating his sync latency buffer. These were the humans. Visitors? They wore no armor, no exosuits. Their loadout menus weren't even fully initialized. One of them, tall, dark-haired, jaw-tight, was crouching and sketching something into the dirt with his finger. A map? No, it looked more like a circle of intersecting loops. The lights shifted from amber to red. Engagement countdown began. Up in the control deck, Administrator Irvek shouted for a system halt. Multiple instructors barked orders to the AI moderator for override. Captain Vale stood beside the entry console, hands clasped behind his back, watching the board scroll. When the override request blinked for human confirmation, he leaned slightly forward and tapped Deny. The staff erupted. He's letting them go in. They don't have permissions. This is a Tier 2 engagement. Vale only said one thing, calm, unflinching. Let's see what observational learning means in practice. The sim clock ticked 0. Neutrality lifted. The scenario went live. The Zarnian team moved fast, standard spearhead pattern with central suppression fire and lateral pincers. Their neural sync allowed predictive targeting, each cadet operating like a node in a broader algorithm. That's how they'd trained for years, high-efficiency strikes based on expected movement profiles and risk thresholds. But the humans didn't play the part. Instead of scattering for cover or forming defense, they converged into a tight formation and then broke into overlapping circles. No front, no flank, no forward motion. The Zarnian AI flagged their behavior as non-aggressive rotational drift, but then their patterns started reacting, not to threat, but to proximity gradients. The humans weren't attacking. They were reshaping the battlefield. Cadet Taran Mithek dropped low near a signal post and bounced his avatar's missions in a rapid loop sequence, 3 short bursts, 2 long, 1 silent. Hal Bren mirrored him on the opposite side. It looked chaotic, but from the airfeed their positions formed a staggered lattice. One by one, they began placing decoy signals into zones that didn't exist on the base sim map. The enemy AI began cross-referencing false threats. By minute 7, the Zarnian team had deployed 2 flanking units into what they believed were weak corridors. They found nothing, just phantom commands, simulated hostiles that didn't fire. The Rax growled, rerouting his squad. But every time they closed in, the humans weren't there, or worse, were behind them, and not firing. "They're not engaging," one of the Zarnian cadets snapped. "No aggression. Then force a full reset. Press through." But each push resulted in positional deadlock. Because the Earth cadets weren't blocking anything, they were shifting expectation. They operated like a swarm, not individuals, not even a squad. Their placements triggered feedback. Their movements looped subroutines. Their decoys convinced the sim AI that the battlefield was wrong. At the 12-minute mark, one Earth cadet initiated a fall protocol, diving into a trench and triggering a false critical injury alert. The AI rerouted enemy targeting vectors toward his location. While Zarnian units adjusted, Hal cross-planted a signal that mimicked Therax's own ID. The sim mistook his presence for friendly fire and suspended his attack privileges. "No hits scored," Therax barked. "No confirmed enemies. They're ghosts." But he was wrong. They were termites. They had eaten through the script. By minute 22, the simulation engine began slowing. Resource allocation fluctuated. Probabilistic threads started duplicating. The AI, expecting elimination patterns or surrender cues, flagged the match as indeterminate. The Rax ordered a full push. All 6 Zarnian cadets surged through what looked like a breach. It was a trap, not a lethal one, not even a wall, just empty space, programmed to loop hostile recognition triggers endlessly. They couldn't distinguish avatar from echo, friendly from enemy. Fire was suppressed. Movement stalled. The system, overloaded by contradiction, triggered a teardrop. Scenario violation detected. Captain Vale hadn't blinked once. The match ended in silence. No deaths, no shots, no objective secured. Simulation invalidated. The Earth cadets regrouped at center. No one celebrated, no cheers, no gloating. Just quiet glances passed between them, like checking if the equation had worked. One boy gave a single thumbs up to Taran. Another cracked his knuckles and said, "I think I broke their map." In the observation deck, Irvek watched the sim board. Tags scrambled, system threads collapsed, engagement path null. He didn't understand what he had just seen. No formations, no hierarchies, no targeted eliminations. The Zarnian team had been outmaneuvered without a single human acting like a soldier. It wasn't strategy. It was something else entirely. And he didn't have a word for it. The silence after the match was longer than the match itself. Officially, the sim had been marked as invalid due to structural incompatibility, but the staff's body language told a different story. Administrator Irvek convened an emergency triad within the hour: internal faculty, oversight officers, and 3 simulation auditors flown in from Sector Thal. Their conclusion was blunt: Earth's cadets were to be removed from all interactive tracks immediately. Observation only. No contact with tiered modules, no interface access beyond visual playback. The override was drafted and filed before noon, but the override didn't hold. Captain Vale arrived at the arbitration chamber without warning. He brought no entourage, no advisor, not even a translator. He walked straight to the submission pedestal and placed a single sealed veto. Inder on the table. The room's transcription filters blinked red. Legacy file format, unprocessed by modern neural tags. The system had to boot a compatibility shell just to read the cover line. Accord Resolution 7-4C, Reciprocal Learning Clause, ratified Cycle 218. The senior moderator scoffed. That statute hasn't been evoked since pre-standardized parity agreements. It was written for tribal song exchanges. Vale didn't blink. Then you're familiar with precedent. Irvek stepped forward, his voice sharp. The clause was designed for cultural demonstration under isolated conditions. You're citing it to gain access to restricted military simulations. That is not exchange. That's intrusion. Vale opened the binder. Inside, 12 printed declarations. One from each Earth cadet, each stating their claim to knowledge parity under Section 5. Reciprocal environments must permit equivalency of experiential bandwidth. It didn't matter that the clause had been buried under centuries of procedural fluff. It was still law, still binding, and the signatures were sealed with genetic encryption keyed to Accord judiciary databases. The chamber went still. One of the legal observers, an aged Drillani with tri-socket eyes, leaned back and exhaled audibly. The humans didn't just file a challenge, he muttered. They filed it in our language, using obsolete subarticles we haven't cited since the expansion treaties. This isn't an accident. Irvek turned to Vale. Who taught them this? I didn't, Vale said. They taught each other. The challenge couldn't be denied outright. Denial would trigger a judicial review, and the Accord couldn't risk headlines, not with the Zarketh hearing still fresh. So the arbitration panel did what bureaucracies always do when cornered. They compromised. Earth's cadets would be granted conditional access to Tier 2 simulations for 7 cycles under direct audit, with observer redundancy. Any incident, and their clearance would be revoked. Vale accepted the terms with a nod. Irvek did not, but the institution wasn't the same after that. Word spread quickly. A species barely 5 decades into Accord presence had weaponized a cultural clause so obscure most recorders marked it deprecated. Some called it clever, others called it dangerous. What rattled the low-caste staff most was what came next, not from Vale, but from the cadets themselves. They began asking questions. Not about weapons or tactics or historic victories. No, they asked things that unsettled even the AI moderators. Can your sim architecture respond to non-causal inputs? Are scenario avatars hard-coded, or are their IDs derivable from unused pools? What happens if you feed looped self-recognition data into the scenario conclusion triggers? One cadet, Len Druvas, requested the feedback trail for an old simulation archive. When denied, he casually asked if shadowed AI branches were still kept in cache buffers, or if Loka had transitioned to full wipe state models. The question wasn't hostile, it was idle curiosity, but it struck the room like a pulse grenade. By the end of the second cycle, internal monitors flagged Earth's team as procedurally anomalous, a term reserved for diplomatic entities that did not behave according to psychological models. One instructor tried to lecture them on positional dominance. The cadets asked if dominance was defined by end-state convergence or midpoint entropy. The instructor left the room pale. On the 4th cycle, an arbitration officer resigned. Official reason: cognitive fatigue due to simulation bleed. The unofficial reason: he couldn't sleep. Said the cadets reminded him of a story his grandfather told, about what happened to the first generation of AI that learned not to predict outcomes, but to break them. And still, the Earth boys prepared. No drills, no pep talks, just long sessions spent sketching feedback maps and scenario flowcharts. They asked, Head markers and magnetic boards refused neural syncs. They wrote on the backs of cafeteria menus, drew graphs on empty chairs. One day they requested a full breakdown of simulation camera latency across the last 10 years. Another day they played cards in silence, assigning bluff weights to simulated combat moves. To the outside eye it looked like nonsense. But Irvek knew better. They weren't preparing to fight. They were preparing to interpret. That was worse, because warriors you could defeat. But interpreters? Interpreters rewrote the language you thought in. And somewhere in the system, hidden behind redundant access logs and deactivated clauses, Captain Vale's signature sat glowing under the final authorization line, right beside a redacted subnote no one could trace. The permissions were already granted, and the humans were ready. The first opponent was the Draxian Tactical Guild, an academy known for its aggressive tiered hierarchies and AI-assisted battlefield compression. They arrived with cloaked pride, adorned in bronze-threaded neural coils and precision-tuned reflex suits, their avatars already preloaded with pre-scenario pacing. The match was announced in formal tones, but the intent was clear. This was not a test. It was a correction, a reassertion of control. Earth's cadets arrived late, not out of rebellion, out of inspection. They paused at the loading deck, not to equip armor or weapons, but to study the signal grid itself. Taran Mithek stood with his head tilted, watching the sim sync flicker at fractional delay. Varric Solon asked the attending technician if the command relays were analog buffered or direct stream. The technician stared at him, confused. "We're just loading in." Varric replied, "Exactly. That's when the instructions are softest." Inside the sim, the Draxian force launched immediately. They struck in coordinated pulses, optimized to compress the human team toward a kill zone within 90 seconds. It should have worked. But the compression pattern encountered resistance, not physical, but logical. Len Druvas had looped their initial marker beacons into phantom command feedbacks. The AI interpreted these ghosts as hostile flanks, rerouting Draxian units into split retreat. When the Draxians tried to consolidate, Varric inserted 3 movement patterns into their prediction systems. Patterns designed to look like overcorrections, too foolish to be real. The system swallowed them, classified them as genuine fallback movements, and tried to account for them in enemy planning. The Draxians began reacting to threats that didn't exist, bracing for flanks that never came. By minute 7, the system returned its first flagged notice. Outcome diverging from expected boundaries. Hal Bren took that moment to upload a mimic loop into the sim's target ID register. Every Draxian command avatar began broadcasting 2 additional signal profiles, friendly and enemy. The sim engine, overloaded with duality, activated its friendly fire threshold failsafe. No Earth cadet fired a single shot, but the simulation collapsed. They didn't win, they broke it. The second opponent was the Velari core cadre, specialists in gravitational suppression and long-range suppression warfare. Their sim was slower, more surgical, designed to test pressure over time. Earth's cadets didn't sprint. They walked. They stood in open terrain. They let themselves be tagged by the scenario's tracking beacons. One by one, they allowed the system to log their presence as visible, low risk. Then Hal and Taran started feeding that presence back. They layered echo patterns onto their avatar's own reflections, allowing the system to register them as duplicate but harmless. The sim's internal logic began buffering its own predictions. Once a scenario loop had enough prediction lag, Len toggled the avatar signature to rotate between dormant and active every 7 seconds, just long enough to confuse the sim's kill-confirm routines. Velari instructors noticed the lag spike first. They paused, attempted a reset. The cadets remained still. That was the horror of it. They didn't push. They let the system collapse under the weight of its own assumptions. When the AI scenario core initiated emergency cleanup, Varric quietly uploaded a variable script on a flashcard. If then, if when. The sim engine crashed. No stats recorded. No victor. Just a single report entry. Scenario output non-representative of protocol expectations. The third opponent came from within Loka itself. The Pertan elite, 12 of their highest-ranked cadets, each trained in multi-environment warfare, full-spectrum analysis, and live AI on AI escalation modeling. This was the pride of the Academy, the cleanup crew. Earth's cadets entered without fanfare. No changes to behavior, no new formations. The only visible difference was in their expressions: calm, fixed, slightly amused. They carried no weapons, no shields, just the knowledge that simulations, like doctrines, were built on rules, and rules, once understood, could be rewritten without alert. From the first minute, the simulation felt off. The Pertan elite advanced in coordinated tiers, but their AI markers returned uneven signal density. Avatar profiles fluctuated, targets blinked in and out of sensory range, not due to stealth, but because the system couldn't determine if they were present. When one cadet launched a suppression volley, his own AI tagged his location as unverified action, resulting in a targeting lockout. The Earth cadets didn't exploit this. They let it fester. At the 9-minute mark, Len activated a backtrace loop, designed not to damage the scenario, but to teach it something false. He fed in movement paths from earlier matches, overlaid with timestamp shifts. The scenario AI began rewriting its own threat escalation maps based on outdated maneuvers, thinking they were new. By the 12th minute, friendly avatars started reacting to movements that hadn't happened. By the 14th, the system stopped rendering physical terrain. Then the AI failed to distinguish avatar from terrain. Then the terrain became the avatar. Earth's cadets walked to the center of the field and stood still. The scenario ended without signal. No resolution code was issued. The sim engine, overwhelmed by recursive architecture, executed a soft shutdown to prevent feedback meltdown. By then, 3 instructors had stepped away from their posts. One removed his neural link and sat quietly in a corridor. He muttered that he had never seen a simulation die without an aggressor. In the debrief chamber, none of the Earth cadets spoke first. They didn't need to. Their posture said it all. We are not here to win. We are here to understand. And in understanding, we rewrite what you thought was unbreakable. Because to them, simulations weren't sacred. They were just structures. And every structure had a pressure point. They called it sacred. The siege of Visak Ridge was not just a simulation. It was the Pertan Institute's defining myth. Every major cadet class was required to complete it. Every graduate had their tactics shaped by it. Instructors spoke of it the way elders spoke of revolutions, part reverence, part scripture. The scenario was based on a historical stand during the Dral Reclamation Wars, when the Accords forces held a single outpost against overwhelming assault. To pass the simulation wasn't merely to win, it was to prove you understood Sakrian, IFIS, formation integrity, and command hierarchy under collapse. The Earth cadets were never meant to run it, but the system flagged them eligible the night before. No one claimed responsibility for the flag, it just appeared, embedded under the same permissions granted after the clause arbitration. Someone might have forced the change, or maybe the system had decided they'd met enough requirements. Either way, the assignment was live, and the countdown had started. By now, the instructors knew better than to protest. Technically, nothing prevented Earth's team from attempting it. And yet, no one expected them to survive 10 minutes. The ridge was brutal by design, a drawn-out meat grinder, where even elite teams rarely completed the mission without heavy AI casualties. It wasn't about cleverness, it was about endurance, holding ground, obeying protocol under fire. But Earth's cadets did not deploy defensive formations. They did not brace themselves along the ridge or calculate fallback trenches. They didn't load their weapons. They walked the terrain in silence, eyes scanning invisible seams. Taran Mithek dropped to one knee and placed his palm against the base mesh. He wasn't anchoring, he was listening. Varric marked nothing on his tactical screen. He simply stared up at the terrain skybox, the stars in the simulation dome, and murmured, "They forgot to change the constellation timestamps." When asked what that meant, he only grinned and said, "Version mismatch. This is the old sim engine. It started with the triggers. In a typical run, the enemy force spawned in phases, predictable though randomized in volume, but Taran rerouted the scenario's trigger arrays using legacy error packets buried in the original architecture. He pulsed old simulation signals, decommissioned tags that weren't supposed to register anymore, but the sim engine still remembered them deep in its command logic, and when it read the packet, it didn't question it. Instead of Phase 1 spawning to the East Ridge, the system initiated an incomplete version of Phase 0, an outdated prelude that should have been purged decades ago. The enemy AI, reading this malformed initiation, began routing its unit awareness to deprecated battlefield parameters. Dozens of soldiers spawned off-map. Some never moved, others wandered into terrain walls. The instructors leaned forward, confused, alert. The cadets did not engage. Next came the voice. A boy named Elik, a quiet one, often unnoticed, stepped into the center trench and spoke a phrase. No command, no threat, just sound. But his tone was wrong, intentionally wrong. A frequency bend, flat, clipped at the ends, almost mechanical. It was the vocal signature of a system glitch, fed through a cadence model trained on synthetic pitch warps. The AI heard it, and it responded. The engine initiated soft reboot. Not full reset, just enough to realign itself. That was all the cadets needed. Within minutes, the signal maps began to fracture. Phantom proxies appeared, harmless at first, then more, then dozens. The AI's own detection lattice tried to filter real from unreal, but the echo pattern Taran fed into the command net used decaying delay signals. Every time the system corrected one phantom, it duplicated 3 more. The scenario now had more enemies than assets. The instructors attempted override. Too late. Hal uploaded a seed script into one of the avatar permissions, the kind meant for minor environmental effects. It did nothing on its own. But when the system read it, the logic tree rerouted through a placeholder field labeled Command Shell, Deferred. No value was assigned. So the system filled it. With itself. The battlefield's awareness looped. Sim entities targeted terrain markers. Aggression scripts reversed. Hostile AI formations began firing on friendlies. Friendly avatars registered as passive environmental nodes. One support AI executed its own artillery battery as a potential corruption vector. At 22 minutes in, the sim timer froze. Then everything did. The ridge stopped existing. No explosion, no fire, no triumphant crescendo, just a blank terrain. Flat, white, then black. System audit engaged. At the control deck, no one spoke. No one moved. The sim display now read, System inconsistent. Audit locked. Instructors checked the override console. It was grayed out. When the emergency panel was activated, the system issued its own declaration. Scenario VSAC Ridge flagged. Historically compromised. Pending review. They hadn't passed the test. They hadn't broken the rules. They'd made the system question whether the test was even valid. Within the hour, the Academy declared the scenario voided due to architectural interference. But the Earth cadets never touched the architecture. They simply refused to obey it. And that, more than anything, was the real violation. Because they didn't destroy the myth of VSAC Ridge. They unmasked it. They showed it could be tampered with, bent, confused, exposed as nothing more than a structure of expectation layered on flawed assumptions. And once seen that way, it could not be unseen. Earth's cadets left the simulation chamber without a word. No high fives, no congratulations, just a shared look, one of quiet certainty. And behind them, the myth crumbled. No fanfare marked their departure, no military escort, no ceremonial corridor lined with salutes or protocol officers offering tokens of respect. The Earth cadets left Locar 9 in the same manner they had arrived, wearing grey visitor bands, boots soft with dust, expressions unreadable. Their shuttle lifted without delay. No interviews, no commentary, no official transmission from the Pertan Institute. And yet something in the silence cracked. The Visak Ridge collapse had set off more than a protocol review. What began as an isolated system audit triggered cascading flags across every connected Academy network. Within 48 hours, Pertan's senior board voted unanimously to freeze incoming enrollment for the next cycle. Not a suspension, not a protest, a pause, just long enough, they claimed, to evaluate cognitive parity doctrine. By the end of the week, 5 additional Tier 1 academies followed suit. Each cited a different reason: resource reallocation, simulation integrity review, curriculum synchronization with Accord ethics, but none spoke aloud the truth. The truth was simple, terrifying, and buried under layers of classified memos tagged non-standard cognition vectors, unknown risk potential. They had seen the future, and it wasn't coming from within their ranks. Back on Earth, the cadets received no medals, no parades. The Commonwealth Academy issued a short statement noting the completion of an off-world observership with cross-tier performance indicators. The names of the 12 were never publicly listed. Their results were not broadcast. Their footage was locked under intergovernmental treaty. They were home before the first analysis papers started to circulate. One paper questioned the rigidity of interspecies training models. Another proposed that simulated warfare, as currently structured, might reflect cultural narrative more than real adaptive utility. A third, written anonymously, suggested that Earth's refusal to compete on expected terms wasn't a fluke. It was an evolved posture. Somewhere deep within the Accord's Strategic Continuity Office, a sealed folder was archived. Stamped with Access Level Omega, it contained only one file. Not a tactical breakdown, not a data stream, just a line, handwritten in Captain Joran Vale's familiar pen. They simulate for glory, we improvise farm, or the aftermath. That's the difference. There was no signature. The folder sat untouched, but its presence altered everything. In quiet, smoke-glass conference rooms orbiting distant worlds, generals began watching old footage. Not just Earth's, their own. Simulations once celebrated as models of discipline and structure now played back with hollow echoes. It became impossible to unsee the scripting, the patterns, the performative choreography of doctrine mistaken for preparedness. They watched footage from Visak Ridge, before Earth, then after. They watched the system collapse not from pressure, but from contradiction. And they realized something cold. None of their drills accounted for chaos that didn't fight back. None of their protocols handled enemies who unmade the scenario itself. None of their cadets had ever asked, what if the war doesn't follow the script? Earth hadn't taught them fear. Earth had taught them doubt. And doubt, once introduced, never leaves quietly. Months later, the Pertan Institute would resume operations. But Visak Ridge was gone. Delisted, retired, its code archived under protective quarantine. The simulation had not been rewritten. It had been deemed psychologically non-viable. No new cadets were allowed to view it. The Academy issued no statement. The Earth cadets never returned. They didn't need to. The impression they left wasn't a scar. It was a shadow, long, silent, stretching backward through every past simulation that once felt real. A reminder that victory isn't always earned by strength. Sometimes it's won by refusing to believe in the battlefield at all. And somewhere, a military historian from the Zarnian Corps, after months of compiling archived behavior patterns and comparative scenario deviations, closed his report with a final bitter line. The war never started, but we already lost. If 12 teenagers could unravel centuries of doctrine without firing a shot, what does that say about the wars we think we're ready for? What would you do if you were one of those cadets? Obey the rules, or rewrite them? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more stories where humanity outsmarts the galaxy in ways no one saw coming, hit that subscribe button and join us for more thrilling HFY tales every day.